Welcome back, weirdos, with another episode of History for Weirdos.
Welcome back, weirdos.
As always, very happy to be here. We hope that you all enjoyed the Oscars, or maybe not, and that's okay too. We got to watch the Oscars with my family, and I was just telling Andrew that I realized I almost never sit and watch the whole Oscars.
I think
this might be like the second time I've done that.
Right. I think this is the first time I did that in like 10 years, maybe.
Yeah, which is wild because they are in and of themselves historic always, right?
Right.
Because this is what, the 96th or the whatever it was. They're little pieces of pop culture history. So it was really fun.
Right. And especially, I think it was interesting too, because we had just mentioned the very first Oscars not that long ago in the episode on Rin Tin Tin.
Yeah, that's right. I was thinking of that and how you mentioned that he got the write-in votes, correct?
Exactly. And also I thought about how in this Oscars, it was like, 3.5 hours long?
Yeah.
They could have taken a page out of the first Oscars. It was only 15 minutes long.
Yeah. That would have been nice.
That's a little too short, but
somewhere in the middle.
Yeah. Towards the first one, honestly. Yeah. I mean, my strategy operational side of my mind was just going nuts. I'm like, this is taking way too long. Just get to the point, guys. Stop. Get to the point.
And the part of me that loves bougie, beautiful fashion was soaking it all in. I love watching what people wear. And something that you wouldn't really appreciate as much as I did is a lot of actors and actresses, I think Carey Mulligan did this year, will wear archival Dolce & Gabbana or Chanel from the 50s, 60s to the Oscars. And I think that's super cool. Vintage fashion is a passion of mine.
Yeah, that is definitely a passion of yours.
Oh my God. Well, anyway, weirdos, before we get into Andrew's amazing story for this week, I just want to give you all a quick reminder to check out our Patreon if you haven't already. All that information is going to be in the show notes. We're going to give you all lots of bonus content that's a little bit more off the cuff and uncensored.
Exactly. So if you like this, if you like the uncensored kind of, I dare say, witty banter at times. Sometimes. If you like that back and forth, we're going to have a lot more of that, off the cuff, straight shooting from the hip, in the Patreon bonus episodes. It's going to be cool, guys.
Exactly. So, babe, tell me. Well, I already know. And they already know because they read the episode title. But tell us anyway.
We always forget that. It's funny.
What are we going to be learning about today?
Well, so let me just get straight into it. It's Saturday, March 25th, 1911, and the U.S. faces one of its deadliest industrial disasters in history.
Dun, dun, dun.
And also, weirdos, I have to mention that Stephanie and my anniversary is also March 25th, and it was on a Saturday.
That is true. That is what I thought of when you said that. That is a significant date for us as well, though it was less disastrous, I imagine.
Less disastrous, right. We did have one guest who got too inebriated and was throwing wine glasses or champagne flutes, excuse me.
Into the river, that's right.
Yeah, so.
Oh, we also had one guest spill red wine onto my wedding dress 10 minutes into the reception.
Right, that's a much bigger event.
Yeah, so there were some disasters.
There were, yeah, not quite on this level though.
I would think not.
Not quite on this level.
But tell us more about this March 25th from 1911.
So this March 25th, 1911, up until the attacks of 9/11, this was actually the deadliest workplace disaster in New York City history.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, so this was really bad. 146 people died. 123 of them were women, 23 men.
Oh my God. That's a lot of people and a disproportionate amount of women.
Right. And we'll get into that as to why that was. But most of the victims were young immigrants. They could barely speak English. Mm-hmm. So they were taken advantage of, in case you couldn't read between the lines.
A more vulnerable group.
Exactly. And so this event would become known as the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire. And it took place in Manhattan, New York City, in a building, interestingly enough, that still stands today as part of NYU's campus, and it's called the Brown Building.
Oh my gosh. I wonder if any weirdos listening went to NYU and are familiar with the Brown Building.
Right. Or especially if you're a current student at NYU, that'd be really cool.
Yeah, that'd be so cool. Let us know.
So, although back in the day it was called the Ash Building, and that's what we'll call it for like the remainder of this episode.
Okay.
So the saddest part about this tragedy is that a lot of it was just simply avoidable.
Oh boy.
We'll get into that, but generally speaking, exits were locked to reduce thefts and unauthorized breaks, which was a common tactic at the time. Completely illegal now.
To lock your employees in?
Yes, so that they couldn't, like... The main exit was open, right? But, like, that had watchful eyes.
Oh my god, so no emergency exits.
Exactly.
Oh no.
Super illegal now.
Yeah.
Also, there weren't any sprinklers installed, which obviously not a good thing. Mm-hmm. And as you can probably imagine, things needed to change to avoid such, senseless tragedies from occurring again. Mm-hmm. So let's kind of take a little bit of a deep dive into like the late 19th century America, especially like industrial America.
Yeah, to get some context for why this was normal.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. So don't worry, guys. I'm going to keep this brief because I think most people would probably find a lot of this not very interesting because we're talking about industrialization, commerce, not exactly the sexiest subject when you're thinking of history. So basically before industrialization, most products being made were from skilled artisans, right? And who had specialized skills.
Yeah.
So power would come from like, water wheels and just the might of humans and animals, right? Like oxen, horses, etc. Mm-hmm. The main social and economic unit during this time, pre-industrial age, was the nuclear family. And that takes place in Europe and in the Americas, or, the 13 colonies.
Wow.
Yeah. And in fact, the social structures, especially even in Europe, had remained practically unchanged since the late medieval period.
Oh my gosh.
Yes.
So this industrialization really was revolutionary.
You got it.
Mm-hmm. Someone should call it that or something.
I know, right? You'd think. However, all of what I said was about to change. Mm-hmm. With the invention of coal-fired steam engines as well as other machines, the pace for labor began to pick up steam. Get it? Do you guys get it?
Yes.
Yeah, you guys get it? Okay, cool. Good. So in factories, coal mines, and other workplaces, the hours were incredibly long, and the conditions generally were dismal and dangerous. Fun stuff.
Yeah, that sounds like terrible.
Right.
But so common. I'm sure you're going to get into that.
Oh, yeah. So the scope of these operations as well began to change. And during the latter half of the 19th century especially, they just began to increase dramatically. So the larger the company, the greater your economies of scale would be, aka your profits would go up and up. Don't worry, this is not like a business econ class. I'm not going to get into it. It's basically just lets you know, I just want to let you know that it better positions you to go internationally and even make more money in different markets.
Okay, that makes sense.
So, and machines were getting sophisticated at this point. By the 1870s, machines were producing stockings, shirts, dresses, and even stitching leather for shoes.
Wow, that's a big change.
It's a huge change.
From doing those things by hand, that would save so much time and money.
Right, and you're able to offer these products at a lower price, at least in theory. Mm-hmm. So one of the biggest consequences of the system, however, was how it helped dissolve the nuclear family, actually. Mm-hmm. There were big-time societal implications to this. Married couples and their children often worked side by side on a family farm or in a shop in the pre-industrial era, right?
Yeah.
However, as industrialization progressed, economic activity shifted to urban centers, and as a result, young workers flocked to where there were jobs, leaving behind the family farm in most cases.
Yeah, their communities, their customs, their ancestral land. Mm-hmm.
Exactly. And you still, see that a little bit, up until recently. I mean, COVID threw everything off, but up until COVID, you were still seeing it.
Yes.
So... And the family farms / family businesses would eventually come to an end a lot of the time, with the young workers flocking to the cities. Mm-hmm. Industrialization, along, with great strides in transportation, again, drove the growth of U.S. cities and a rapidly expanding market economy.
Yeah.
So as a consequence, this led to a development of a large working class in the United States society, leading eventually to labor struggles and strikes led by working men and women, and would sow the seeds of many issues we even face to this day.
That's what I was thinking.
You'll see there's a lot of parallels, I think, of what's going on today and what was happening a little over 100 years ago.
Yeah, when corporations value profits over people.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
So what were the working conditions like during this time period? In short, they sucked. Like, I'm just going to be honest, guys. They sucked. So workers were often housed in cramped, unsanitary conditions to begin with, right? Just getting off the bat. And the working conditions were just very dangerous. So ventilation was usually awful in these places, and you could inhale like toxic gas on a daily basis. And these machines themselves could easily maim or kill workers, which happened quite often.
Can you imagine going into work and like you're going to have your normal work day, but then you lose an arm or a leg, or your child doesn't come home because a machine destroyed them and they were getting paid like $0.25 an hour?
Right. Oh yeah, it's so bad. They were getting paid like, I think even, I don't know about worse than $0.25 an hour, but like they were getting paid, $10 to $15 a week. And they're working 12 hours a day, like every day.
And they don't even have clean air to breathe.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And not even, yeah. And like my next note was the low wages and long hours expected of workers. And they were paid on a weekly basis, regardless of the amount of actual hours worked, right?
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, it was terrible. Labor unions did exist during the late 19th century, but they were fairly useless at this point in time. And they didn't really gain traction well into like the 20th century in terms of power.
Yes.
So let's just get into the details of the factory where all this went down. So I mentioned before this took place in the Ash Building in Manhattan, New York City, again, which still stands to this day. Kind of cool.
We'll share a picture on Instagram.
Absolutely, we will. So the factory was owned by two men, Max Blank and Isaac Harris, who were businessmen with a pretty bad reputation.
I'm sorry, is one of their last names Blank?
Blanck, Blank.
Oh my gosh, that's so funny.
Yeah.
Because it sounded like you were just saying Max Blank, like you're trying to protect his identity or something.
No, screw these guys. Yeah. Definitely not protecting their identities. One plus they're long dead.
Yeah.
So, yeah, we'll get into their terrible reputation in a moment. The 8th, 9th, and 10th stories, so those are the top 3 stories of the building. Mm-hmm. That is where the factory was located. So, you're talking a lot of stairs, a lot of floors up to the building. And it was basically a sweatshop. Mm-hmm. Just, there's no way of getting around that. It was a sweatshop. Mm-hmm. They employed mainly young immigrant women who worked in a very cramped space at lines of sewing machines. Most of them, like I mentioned, could not even speak English or speak very little English, and they worked 12 hours a day every day. This
is so awful. That sounds like hell.
It does.
That sounds like you've died and gone to hell.
It really, industrial is like, the Industrial Revolution has been pretty disastrous for humankind.
Yes.
In certain regards.
Yes, I think that's totally right. In some ways, the Industrial Revolution obviously brought us plenty of advancements that we've needed that make life easier in some respects, but I feel like it's come at such a great cost.
The Industrial Revolution and its consequences. Anyway, if you know, you know.
If you know, you know.
So by the time of the fire, right, there were 4 elevators that could reach the floors of the factory. But by 1911, only one of them was actually operational.
What the heck, guys?
Yes. And workers had to file down like a long, narrow corridor in order just to reach it.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, not good. And also there were 2 stairways down to the street, but one of them was locked from the outside to prevent stealing. And the other one only opened like inward, which would like make things really hard in a rush when there's tons of people like, running out.
The fire hazard is insane.
Oh, it's like a case study. I mean, I'm sure it really literally was at some point. Like, it's a case study of what not to do.
And how freaking stupid to be like, let me lock this exit that could save people's lives because God forbid one person every once in a while steals a freaking shirt.
They were that greedy. These people, like, I really, really, the more I looked in the story, the more I hated them towards the end. Like, they were terrible human beings.
I bet.
Just awful. So all of the safety precautions, they were just ignored, right? I think it's fair to say at this point.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because there were rumors that the two men who owned the factory, right, they had purposefully burned down previous factories simply because they were insured for large sums of money, and they did it just to collect.
Oh my gosh, what scumbags. And I couldn't think of a better word, excuse me.
They're scumbags.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think that's fair. Also, Blank and Harris were notoriously anti-worker.
Uh-huh.
I mean, they paid their employees only about $15 a week, right? Like the very low end of the spectrum. And the International Ladies Garment Workers Union actually led a strike in 1909 demanding higher pay and shorter, more predictable hours to like a lot of garment working companies, right? Mm-hmm. Or garment companies, whatever. Blank and Harris's company was only one of just a few manufacturers who actually resisted those demands. Everyone else was like, oh yeah, that's fine, you know?
Yeah, you want predictable hours, I guess.
Right. These guys were like, no.
How are you anti-worker? Those are the people making your product so you can make money.
Oh, it gets worse. You want to hear?
Yeah, I want to hear.
So, he sounded so defeated.
Yeah.
So they hired police to act as thugs, basically to imprison the striking women, and they even paid off politicians to look the other way. So they were fine with bribery. They were fine with, egregious abuse of the law, but they were not fine with paying their workers more. Like, it's so insane to me.
They went through all of that just to avoid giving them a semi-decent, barely livable wage.
Yeah, pretty much. They were peaches. They were unscrupulous.
Yes.
I literally put that in my notes. Unscrupulous.
I like that. That's an SAT word.
Yeah, there you go. So before we get into the actual disaster, let's talk about like what was even being made in this factory, right? What the hell is a shirtwaist?
Yeah. So
it's basically a woman's blouse that sort of looked like a man's shirt. On our Instagram, we'll have a picture of what a shirtwaist is.
Yes.
So it was valued for its ready-to-wear workplace appeal and its simple design. So it could be worn jacketless, and this is for the ladies. It could be worn jacketless and fashionably tucked into the waistband of a skirt. And it was sold as both like an individual piece and as an ensemble.
Yes.
They were particularly fashionable like in the early 20th century, like very end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century. And the industry in producing these garments was really competitive. As this types of clothing has become sort of like a status symbol.
Really?
Right. Because it sort of represented this newfound female independence.
Yes.
Right? In a time of like progressive ideas, women don't need men, and they can earn their own wages, and they were freed from domestic duties.
That's so cool. That's so interesting that a shirt could symbolize so much.
Exactly. And that's what it did. It was a statement piece.
Because I will say the fashion in the West prior to this would have been, I know that sounds really formal, like a long sleeve blouse tucked into a floor length skirt with petticoats underneath, but that would have been very dressed down.
It would have, yes.
In previous eras. So this is more freeing to even move around in. It sounds like it was representative of this new freedom that women were getting.
It's funny. I feel like I did the research in this part, but like you'd still know more than me or than I.
It's because, like I said at the beginning of the episode, I love fashion history too.
You do. This is really your jam. Kind of like when you talk about ancient history, that's it. like you're like almost like appealing to my demographic, and then now I feel like I'm returning the favor a little bit.
Yes, I love it.
So
this is a treat for me. I like it.
I'm glad. So in New York City alone, there were hundreds of factories producing these types of garments. So like it was a big deal, right? Like there were hundreds in New York City alone.
Wow.
So at this point, I think we've laid down a lot of groundwork of what's happening across not like the United States, as well as, you know, what's going on at the actual Triangle Shirtwaist Factory itself. Mm-hmm. So here is where we get to the events of March 25th, 1911. The Saturday afternoon. It's around like 4:40 p.m. and there were a total of 600 workers present at the factory when the fire started.
That's a lot of people.
Yeah. We think it began in a rag or like some sort of scrap bin at the factory on the 8th floor from something as small as a cigarette butt.
Ooh.
You weren't supposed to smoke in there.
I was just going to ask.
But because they, you know, the
vents are closed.
Yeah,
who's gonna know?
The vents are closed, and like, and also you can't even go outside for a smoke break or anything like that.
That's true.
So, you know, they would kind of smoke it inside their jackets. It's hard to imagine, but that's what they would do.
I bet under those conditions, probably both men and women needed some sort of creature comfort.
Right, exactly.
You need something to help you get through the day.
I think so. I think it was like their one treat. That's what they look forward to. Mm-hmm. You said it perfectly. So again, I guess in this case, you know, and it's true, smoking does kill.
Ooh, so true.
Too soon?
On so many levels, you guys, smoking kills. So don't smoke.
Smoking kills, yeah. So basically when you make shirtwaists, there is a ton of fabric that is left over, and it like adds up to pounds and pounds of this stuff. And that was like what was underneath a work table was probably these scraps from these shirtwaists. And there's like, you know, there's frayed edges and stuff, like the not fiber, but the cloth and all of that is really just has a lot of loose ends and is really easy to be it's really easy to catch flame.
Yeah, that sounds like good fodder.
Yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm. So the manager on duty saw it pretty early and tried to use a fire hose on the premises, but the hose had rotted away and its valve was rusted shut. So of course it did not work.
Shut the front door. They didn't even have a working hose?
They didn't even have a working hose.
And they hadn't checked in so long.
Not a working hose. They had a fire, like a fire alarm. They had a fire like sprinkler system, right? That didn't work either.
Oh my God. They're not even trying.
They're not trying at this point.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, literally, they're not. So a bookkeeper, and I think I'll get into that in a little bit, but a bookkeeper on the 8th floor was able to warn employees on the 10th floor via telephone, and he did save a lot of lives that way. However, there was no way of contacting the 9th floor.
What?
Yes. According to one survivor, the first warning of the fire on the 9th floor arrived at the same time as the fire itself.
Oh, I just got chills. How terrifying.
So you had maybe seconds warning before,
yes.
You know, there was a massive fire coming from underneath you. That's terrifying.
Oh my gosh.
Because the fire was moving really fast. It was quick.
Because you're in a fabric tinderbox, basically.
Exactly.
Oh no.
It's really interesting too, because we kind of have like almost like a minute by minute, like what's happening. And like, I'll generally kind of go over like what's happening like on that time frame. Mm-hmm. So within about the first 3 minutes of the fire starting, flames were already blocking one of the exits down to the street on Green Street. About 20 or so employees desperately tried climbing down the exterior fire escape, but unfortunately for them, this would be a deadly mistake. The fire escape was probably already broken before the fire like even happened. And the flimsy structure twisted and broke off from the building, killing all 20 people as they all fell to their deaths.
I have nothing to say. I'm sorry. Feel so bad for these people.
The fire department got to the building quickly, thankfully, but their ladders could only reach the 7th story. So everyone within the actual factory, which are floors 8 through 10, were kind of SOL. Not kind of, they were SOL. Elevator operators Joseph Zito and Gaspar Mortillaro were heroes that day, making 3 trips up to the 9th floor for additional passengers.
Oh my gosh, can I see Gaspar's name?
Yeah.
Gaspar is a common Hungarian name, so he might have been Hungarian.
Oh,
fun
look
fact.
at that. So, unfortunately, though, they had to stop because the elevator got too damaged from the fire, and also because, this is bad, but some of the workers had forced open the doors to the elevator shaft and just were jumping down the shaft to escape the flame, and they were hitting the top.
I had a feeling that was coming because it sounds like people were going to get desperate really fast.
And they did. So, interestingly, the owners actually happened to be there this day while it was happening.
I hate them.
They had their children with them. So, they were up on the 10th floor when it all happened, which is lucky for them. And I'll say why here in a second. Because they were able to go up to the roof and then go to an adjoining building and then go down that building.
Yeah, because in New York, so many of them are so squished together.
Right, and even still to this day, it is like literally squished next to the next building.
Okay.
Yeah, we live in LA. Like, buildings aren't typically like that.
Yeah, if you did that here, you would die.
Yeah. So, as we know, many people were not so lucky, though, and were unable to escape the flames, right? An eyewitness account from Lewis Waldman, who's a New York State Assemblyman, he said the following, quote, "Horrified and helpless, the crowds, I among them, looked up at the burning building, saw girl after girl appear at the reddened windows, pause for a terrified moment, and then leap to the pavement below, to land as mangled, bloody pulp. This went on for what seemed a ghastly eternity. Occasionally, a girl who had hesitated too long was licked by pursuing flames and, screaming with clothing and hair ablaze, plunged like a living torch to the street. Life nets held by the firemen were torn by the impact of the falling bodies. The emotions of the crowd were indescribable. Women were hysterical, scores fainted, men wept. As paroxysms of frenzy, they hurled themselves against the police lines." End quote.
My gosh, a nightmare.
It sounds, I mean, to this day, that would, if you had to witness this, like, I feel like it would give you PTSD.
Oh yeah.
And like, I feel like back then, a lot of people were like not quite as desensitized to violence like we are today. This would have scarred you easily for the rest of your life.
It sounds like something out of Dante's Inferno.
It really does. I mean, this is hell. Like, this is a living hell brought on by industrialization, right?
And these young women that he describes, falling to their deaths, it just breaks my heart because particularly in this country, people immigrate here on the sheer hope of a better future for themselves or for their family. What an especially tragic way to go due to the negligence of your employer.
Exactly. I couldn't have said it better myself. It's estimated that at least 62 people jumped to their deaths in front of the crowds. 62. That's a lot. Within 18 minutes, the fire was completely put out.
Oh my gosh.
This all happened within 18 minutes.
That's really fast.
But it was too late for the 146 people that had perished in the fire.
Oh my God, those flames must have been devouring the building.
And this was all due to greed and just a disregard for human life.
Yeah. Oh, I'm not going to spend money on repairing the hose. Who cares? Yeah. It's just, what, immigrant women working here?
Pretty much. Yeah, you're going to get really mad here.
No, I'm already really mad.
Because we'll talk about the two owners here in a second. But all in all, the workers who had passed were interred in about 16 different cemeteries across the city. Almost all the victims were identified within weeks, but it took up until 2011 for the last 6 remains to be identified.
No way.
And that was mostly thanks to historian Michael Hirsch.
What an honorable thing to do.
Yeah.
2011 is when I graduated high school.
Yeah, and it was literally exactly 100 years after this happened. Yeah, I still remember 2011. God, it was a long time ago. So the immediate aftermath of this to the public Like their reaction was shock, anger, and an intense disgust.
Of course.
So on April 5th, just 11 days after the fire, estimates kind of range from 80 to 100,000 people marched in the streets to protest working conditions.
Wow,
this
that's
was just
amazing.
11 days later.
Yeah, and it was so much harder to organize back then.
Exactly. Yeah, you didn't have social media or anything.
Mm-hmm.
So activists over the next few months constantly petitioned their local state leaders to do something in the name of building in worker health and safety.
Mm-hmm.
3 months later, John Alden Dix, the then governor of New York, signed a law empowering the Factory Investigation Committee, which resulted in 8 laws covering fire safety, factory inspection, sanitation, and employment rules, especially for women and children.
That's really necessary.
Yeah. And then in 1912, legislators in New York State enacted another 25 laws that transformed its labor protections. And many of these laws actually would become federal laws during the New Deal just a couple decades later.
Wow. That's crazy how impactful this tragedy was.
Right. It had far-ranging consequences.
This is also why our representatives are so important. Be an informed voter and go out and vote.
Yeah, well, and tell the representatives, like, stop caring about corporations, care about your constituents.
Mm-hmm.
That's all I have to say. So going back to 1911, later that year, the American Society of Safety Professionals was formed in New York City to prevent workers and prevent tragedies like this from occurring again. So what about the people responsible, right? What happened to Max Blank and Isaac Harris?
They were ripped apart by an angry mob.
I wish I could tell you that was the case, but it is not.
I had a feeling it wasn't. I just wanted it to be for 2 seconds.
Fair. They were both indicted on charges of first and second degree manslaughter in about mid-April, and their trial began in December of 1911. They, luckily for them, had a brilliant lawyer by the name of Max Stewart who was able to successfully defend them against those charges.
Of course, because that's what it takes, right, is being able to afford a fancy lawyer.
Just like a super high-priced lawyer. And of course, they paid him. Mm-hmm. They paid him what he was asking.
Yeah, of course. They didn't argue and devalue his work.
Nope. They were found not guilty on the manslaughter charges, but were convicted of wrongful death charges, which didn't even land prison time for them. In fact, it was only in a civil suit that they were found guilty and had to pay, get this, $75 to each family of the victims. So like per victim, they'd pay $75 to the family.
Oh my God. That is a slap in the face.
Ooh, and it just gets worse.
How can it get worse?
They were paid $400 per person by the insurance company, so they profited off of this.
I'm done.
Oh, it gets even worse.
Babe, stop saying that.
So Blank and Harris, so the most of the immigrants, and I didn't mention this earlier, they were either Italian, Jewish, or Irish, right? And then like other ones as well, but really, like I think it was Italian and Jewish were the two big ones.
So, and by Jewish you mean like maybe Eastern European,
right? Like
Russian.
Ashkenazi, you know,
Ashkenazi
like
Jewish.
kind of just generalized, right?
Okay.
Blank and Harris were both Jewish immigrants themselves. So the fact that they acted like villains in a Dickens novel is just insane to me.
What is wrong with these guys?
Oh, they're sociopaths. They must have like some personality disorder.
Yeah, zero empathy. I mean, absolutely.
You're the therapist, so I guess you tell me.
Sociopathy is antisocial personality disorder, so that could be what they have.
I'm good with that.
A complete lack of empathy and regard for others.
Yeah, I could see that.
I could see that.
But because of their negligence, the U.S. began to take worker safety much more seriously, though I really wish, personally, they had just been punished way more severely.
Absolutely. They should have done
prison time.
Prison time.
That's 25 years to life.
Your negligence ended the lives of how many people? Like
146.
That's insane to be able to walk away and profit off of it.
Yeah. So in my mind, like the culmination of the workers' protections movement was in probably 1970 with the Occupational Safety and Health Act, or OSHA.
OSHA, yeah.
And the primary mission of it was to ensure that employees carry out their tasks under safe working conditions, right? That's not too much to ask for. So I do think that this fire was indeed a huge catalyst to make better working conditions for the American worker, but I think it's really sad that 146 people had to die in order for this to happen.
Yeah, and that even with such a large tragedy, it still took us in the U.S. so long to really be like, actually, keeping our workers safe is super important. Let's make sure that's like a standard.
Exactly.
It still took a very long time.
It did. And I do think the challenges that we face today are different, but there's certainly like a parallel, like present, and at least in my mind. You know, working conditions are far better than they have been in the past, but workers are still criminally underpaid despite record productivity and advancements, right? And most importantly, like corporate elites and government, you know, they don't really care about you. I think we can all agree. It doesn't matter like where you consider yourself politically. You can pretty much agree that corporations and the government, they do not care about you. And it's important to realize that. It's important to really understand that.
We're guaranteed, I guess, we're guaranteed physically safe working conditions, not necessarily emotionally safe.
Right.
And aside from that, the cost of living is so high, most people can't afford to be alive, let alone get sick and have hospital bills.
Right.
So
yeah, I could be on like a soapbox for like 2 straight hours with this.
Yeah.
But to sum it all up, I think it's really in everyone's best interest, or like 99.99% of people's best interest, to do what you can against kind of large corporations and big government, right? Especially the unholy alliance between the two.
You tell them, babe.
Yeah. Buy from small local businesses.
I love that.
Instead, right? Support any workers' movements, right? If a labor union is on strike, support them. I used to like be annoyed when I would see like worker strikes, like when I was going to like the grocery store when I was like, you know, like younger or whatnot.
Yes.
And now I'm like, oh no, I'm 100% on their side.
Of course.
100%.
Of course. We've seen so many recently, right? Obviously, like within entertainment, there were for actors and for writers, but there's also been a lot for hotel employees.
Right.
Here in California, for our Cal State system, which is like our public schools, universities, the professors have been striking on and off because they're so severely underpaid, and their classrooms are getting bigger and bigger and their paychecks stay the same. Yeah.
That sounds right.
Yeah.
That sounds right.
So support the strikes.
Yeah. And in general, just reject blatant consumerism and like embrace reusing and borrowing when possible, right? Especially like I've seen a lot of TikTok videos talking about like forming, for lack of a better term, like collectives, I guess, or like, and all that.
The no
really
buy
means,
groups.
Yeah, no buy groups. Yeah, exactly. Like there's groups 25, 50 people even. That's just like, hey, like I have this. Does anyone need it? And then you kind of just all give each other stuff.
Those exist on Facebook. I know Facebook is history in and of itself. It seems archaic.
It is.
But you can join like local no buy groups, like based on your zip code or whatever. And then there's a lot of those like community platforms, like neighborhood websites where you can participate in those as well.
Oh, that's awesome.
It's especially great if you have kids, because kids grow out of stuff so fast.
That's such a good point. Yeah, they really do.
I love this. I love these tips, babe.
Yeah, I know. I was like, you know what? I'm going to tell the weirdos just a few bullet points on my mind. Guys, I promise you, I could really go on for hours. I don't think anyone wants that though. So
yes,
maybe some of you do, but.
And honestly, this is like personal, I guess, but it's so easy to get caught up in consumerism and just buy things for the sake of buying things because they're marketed to us to make us feel like you're inadequate without this thing.
Right.
But that's not the case.
It's not the case at all.
Yeah.
And, well, kind of all what we've talked about is how I interpret this event and how I could absolutely see, something like this happening again, maybe not directly like this, right? But something maybe 21st century version of this happening again if we allow just rampant greed to influence decisions, right? Especially as, corporations get bigger and bigger and competition is like decreasing.
Yeah. And if we don't value just human lives, the dignity of human people.
Perfectly said.
You said it perfectly.
No, you did.
Oh my gosh, stop. The weirdos are going to get grossed out.
I know. That's way too sweet. You're probably like literally barfing, and I don't blame you. Okay, guys, that's all I have for this week for this episode. The sources were really interesting. So Encyclopedia Britannica, History.com had an amazing article on this. The Smithsonian as well.
Oh, I love the Smithsonian.
Yeah, me too. There was also PBS, Nat Geo, Library of Congress even. And then, of course, our favorite Wikipedia.
This was awesome, babe. Thank you so much for telling us all about the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire.
Pretty cool, huh?
Terrible story, but so important to know.
Yeah, when I meant pretty cool, like it's a cool story.
I knew what you meant. Don't worry.
The people burning to death or jumping to their death, not cool.
Not cool, but really crucial to not forget things like this and to... What you love, I think you're so good at doing this with our episodes and with history in general, is identifying how does this relate to us today.
Yeah, that's how my brain works.
I love that.
I think it's my ADHD.
Pattern recognition.
I love pattern recognition, right? And like systems especially, and understanding like the differences between different systems and how they relate today, especially like you said. That's literally, I could do that all day, every day. We mentioned our ADHD, I think, in the last episode, and it was so funny, you guys, because in our Patreon, in one of the group chats, so many people were popping off like, I have ADHD too. Maybe that's why I like your podcast. Oh my God. Oh yeah. Let us know in the comments, by the way, especially like if you are listening on Spotify, drop a comment on like any thoughts that you have on the Shirtwaist Factory, like today, how it relates to today. Yes. Anything that like kind of comes to your mind. Also, let us know if you have ADHD. Let us know on Instagram or on Spotify as well. It's for research purposes. Yeah, I'm genuinely curious, guys. Like, I bet there's a lot of us out there but it makes so much sense. Like, weird history, like random Wikipedia deep dives is such an ADHD thing to do. Right. Well, don't sell us short. We deep dive on at least a half dozen different sources, but I know what you're saying. No, but that kind of, for the listeners, that of mentality, like who would listen to a podcast like this is the type of person that would do like a random midnight Wikipedia deep dive. I see. Yeah, that's totally true. And that used to be us. Yep. And then we started a podcast. Oh my God. Wow. I guess people really aren't all that different when it comes down to it. We're more similar than we may think. Yeah, we're all individuals, but well, it's pretty similar. Yeah. Sometimes social media, like when I see like a TikTok or a reel or something, and they are joking about like a hyper specific reference to something you do when you're alone, I'm like, have I ever had a unique thought before in my life? No, nothing's unique. So if you're feeling like, oh, I'm just like everyone else, maybe, but just go for it anyways. I agree. I like that. And thank you again for this episode. I really enjoyed it. Yeah, you got it. And yeah, that's all I have this week. Weirdos, thank you as always for being here, for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate, review, subscribe, follow, or maybe share it with a friend or family member that might enjoy it as well. Right. Yeah. We really appreciate you. We really appreciate you guys. The weirdo community, like we just posted on Instagram, like you guys are incredible, right? You guys are such an amazing group of people. That I feel like are super random, right? From all walks of life. And all over the world. And it is so incredible, like listening to your guys' stories when you email us, when you like write comments on Instagram and stuff. I love reading that. And especially like on our Patreon. I know like we go a little bit deeper in Patreon. So, shameless plug. If you're interested in that stuff, definitely join the Patreon. Yeah. Well, then until next time, weirdos. Until next time. Adios.